Specifically, the topic for today is just interview questions and just kind of articulating your work.
Mhm.
And one specific thing is talking about your projects. I know that when I talk to a lot of designers, they always say a challenge they have is striking that fine line of articulating their passion, but also keeping a low ego and humility.
Right.
And just through your experience, if you can shed any light on just really talking about your projects and a certain way that you do it and the advice that you can give.
Sure. Sounds good. So the question's pretty vague and broad, so there's a lot of different components to it. So keep me on track here, but there's
Mhm.
communicating your work online publicly to people for, either freelance contracts or for general personal branding. Also to kind of get recruiters and managers to reach out to you. That's like one kind of dimension. The second dimension is in your portfolio itself, the storytelling, the case study. And third dimension is how you actually communicate the your work in an interview. And even then, it depends on the company that you're interviewing for and who your audience is. So I can go briefly into like all three or deep dive into one. Which one would be most interesting for you?
Yeah, I think we can let that open to the chat, but maybe just kind of a general overview of one, and if we have of the three, and then if we have time, maybe a deeper dive.
Sure. So I'll focus on the portfolio for now, since I think that might be the most relevant. A
Hmm.
common pitfall a lot of new designers have is, people that graduate from any generic UX boot camp. They're taught this very, very specific process, and as a result, they lean very heavily into user research. Um, but they kind of end up creating the same cookie cutter portfolio case study as everyone else, and it becomes very, very hard for you to stand out. So your case study should be communicating like the impact, the scope, and also like what unique skill sets and context do you bring to the table. So like very often I'll see a case study that's like a generic redesign of Yelp or Facebook or Spotify, and they do that cookie cutter portfolio process of here is a problem statement. I did user research. Here are the personas. Here are my wireframes I sketched out. Here is my mockup, and here is my interaction flow, and here's my prototype, and these are lessons
Hmm.
learned. So maybe 3 or 4 years ago, that was enough to get you hired, but nowadays, like, it has to be a bit different. Like, very rarely are you going to use like a standard design process for anything. It's more about knowing what exact problem you're trying to solve. What are the assumptions that you have to take into account when you make decisions, especially design decisions, and how you're going to articulate like your personal approach to problem solving. So I've talked about this at length before, but there's two ways for you to stand out as a designer. The first way is to kind of get to that pinnacle 99th percentile skill level. And one of the skills, it doesn't have to be the big three, which are interaction design, visual design, and product thinking. Maybe you're a god tier animator, you're a god tier illustrator. That's one way for you to stand out. Obviously, as a new designer, that's impossibly hard to do. So a much better way to stand out is to actually develop the right combination of skills and contexts to become uniquely qualified at solving a certain high value problem within either an industry and or domain or problem space. And your case study should be reflecting of that. So when I see a case study from a junior designer and it's like, here are three redesigns I did in random industries, they're all very generic, and like the goal is to just improve usability, that falls like very flat for me. A much more powerful case study would be, hey, I'm a designer especially passionate about fintech, uh, in the fintech industry, and I focus exclusively on user retention, and all my case studies are centered around user retention, and the skill sets I've developed are centered around solving user retention problems. Then that becomes really interesting, because if I'm a hiring manager at a company, that matches that profile, then you become a very, very like powerful candidate for me specifically. Um, so what that means is like, you know, you're not going to be the best candidate for every job, but once you figure out a niche that's like very high value to you, then you'll craft the right portfolio case studies to highlight the right skills and the right context within that industry and domain space to become like a really good candidate. And that's the best kind of approach to portfolio that I can think about.
Mm.
I don't know if that's like too general, but is that helpful?
I think so. I think it really does give a good overview of just kind of showcasing not just your process, but just kind of like your skill sets and showcasing what really makes you unique.
It's
Um,
Yeah,
Pardon,
sorry.
go ahead.
A lot of it's like on storytelling. You want to
Mm,
craft something called a career narrative. So even though your experience might be very scattered across a lot of different industries and projects, you need to pick and choose what parts of your portfolio and your background and your CV you want to emphasize for
mhm,
the target company or role that you're going for. For example, like I've worked at a lot of different companies, but in my current role, which is very focused on 0 to 100 consumer growth, I talk about gamification, I talk about data, I talk about research, I talk about you know, marketing design and funnel optimization, and I talk
mhm,
about all the work I've done in the consumer marketplace space. Even though I have experience with enterprise and digital transformation and you know branding and motion, those aren't as important for the type of role that I'm going for right now. So
mm,
I kind of de-emphasize those while emphasizing the ones that do matter. And that's what really should come out in your portfolio. This is also why you know, a lot of people will waste a lot of time creating a like a website for their portfolio, which is fine. But for me, that only makes sense if you're going to be like a freelancer, you're trying to attract a lot of clients. If you want to go for more of an in-house product designer role, it's better for you to actually create like a slide deck template and then just cut and paste the slides in the right order and as they become relevant um, for the type of role you're going for. So I have like one master case study that's like 130 slides, but depending on like what company or role I'm going for, I cut it down to like 30 or 40 to emphasize the skills I want to bring to the table that are uniquely valuable for that company. And in terms of like what's valuable, essentially there's only two really big dimensions for any company. It's revenue and growth. Generally, for startups and mid-sized companies, growth is more important. So you want to think about what problem space can I specialize in, and how does that relate to either of those two metrics? Whereas enterprise and more mature companies are focused on revenue. So
mhm.
every single problem that's worth solving has to be tied to either of those two metrics. And then for you, you just need to figure out, you know, what kind of problem space or niche do you want to develop, and what are the right skill sets to develop. And the interesting thing about this is that you don't need to be a pro at all these skills. It's more like you want to develop all those necessary skills to the right level or the minimum level to be useful in that context.
You said originally with just kind of get a broad overview of understanding the topics, but also specializing, and one route is being the 99th tier of really developing and honing in that one skill, whether it's interaction design or understanding the business element of design. And really, once you hone in, coming a T-shaped design, articulating it.